Welcome to Kumbalink's 2020 Hip Hop Summer Series. My name is Ozivell and this is Page to Stage. This video is sponsored by After School Matters and Uplift Community High School, and it is produced again by Kumbalink's. Thank you for joining me. To recap what we talked about last week, we talked about what is a monologue, what is a dialogue, what is stage direction, and what is the difference between theater spelled R-E and theater spelled E-R. We said that theater spelled E-R is the building, theater with R-E at the end is the art. We talked about upstage, downstage, stage right, stage left, upstage right, downstage right, downstage left. We talked about what's the difference between the stage and the house, and how when you're on stage as the actor, your stage left is the audience member's stage right. We talked about how a monologue is given by one person, and we talked about how a dialogue can be 3 or more people. If you need more recap than that, go to the Google Classroom and check out the assignment. The videos are still up. You're more than welcome to check it out, or go to kumbalink's.com and you can see all of the videos from the 2020 Hip Hop Summer Series there. Okay, for week 2, we're going to jump right into it. This week, we're going to be talking about what is poetry, and how does it work? What are tools to make it memorable, to make it entertaining to the audience? What's the difference between writing a poem, spoken word, writing slam poetry, writing songs, writing rap? What's the difference between those genres or those type of writings? So, let's talk about the different types of poetry before we get into what makes a poet. Okay, so if you go to this website called masterclass.com and you search for this article called Poetry 101, they will give you all the information about what makes up poetry, what makes up different types of poetry, what tricks can you use to make poetry more interesting. We're going to talk about it here, but if you want more information and you want to go a little deeper with it, I highly recommend that you go to masterclass.com and look up the article Poetry 101. So, when it comes to poetry, what is poetry? So, most sites, most experts, most writers will say that poetry is expressing one's thoughts and emotions. Okay? Now, there's different styles of poetry to help one do that. For instance, you have what's called elegies. Elegies are basically like eulogies. The subject matter usually deals with death. Okay? Then we have sonnets, limericks, lyric, ballad, soliloquy. Last week in week 1 we talked about soliloquy. Now usually a soliloquy is a monologue in a play. It's a type of monologue where the actor expresses his thoughts and feelings in the moment. They're going through catharsis. Okay? The reason why we bring this back up when dealing with poetry is because a guy named William Shakespeare wrote a bunch of soliloquies in the form of poems. So that's why we kind of see soliloquy in poems. So after that, we have slam poetry, we have blank verse, we have rhyme, we have epics. Epics are lengthy poems. They're really long poems. Think of an epic movie like Lord of the Ring. Each movie was 3 hours long, and there's 3 of them. Actually, 6 of them if you count The Hobbit. That's a lot of TV. That's a lot of us sitting on the couch and eating popcorn. That's epic. Alright? So these poems are epic, and they normally tell the tale of a hero of some sort. They normally chronicle their adventures. So that's an epic. Then we have free verse. We have let me see what this says. Sorry. Narrative. We have haiku. We have pastoral poetry, which is usually poetry written about landscapes or environments. And then we have odes. It's just like a tribute to someone. You're talking about the great things that an individual did over their life. It's an ode. Okay? So those are pretty much the different types of poems. Now we're going to talk about what's the difference between a poet, a spoken word artist, a slam poet, and a rapper. What it all comes down to is intention and motivation for creation. I'll explain. If you do a Google and you ask the question, what is a poet versus what is a spoken word artist, you will find a lot of articles that say exactly what I'm about to say to you. A poet is someone that writes poetry to express their thoughts and their emotions. And when it comes to interpretation, they're more willing to allow you to decide what the interpretation is. So if you ask them, hey, I like your poem, what did it mean? They'll ask you, what do you think it means? However, when it comes to a spoken word artist, the spoken word artist has a little bit more intentionality, a little bit more purpose as to why they're writing, because they are intentionally thinking about the effect that their words and their poem is going to have over the audience. A spoken word artist is also more likely to have their poem memorized and be off book, because they want to be free to make it as theatrical and dramatic and expressive as possible. They don't want to be hindered by what's on the page by looking at it and looking up. Okay, so a spoken word artist is more likely to be similar to acting, and they're thinking about how and when and if they're going to make the audience laugh, cry, angry, curious. They're every word that they select and the way that they say it, the tempo, the metering of it is all by design and intentionality for the audience. Okay, and then we have a slam poet. Now, what is a slam poet? A slam poet is simply a poet that is competitive. They compete in what's called slams, which is just another word for competition. And a slam poet is a poet. A slam poet is a spoken word artist. They're just competitive with theirs, almost like a battle rapper, right? So let's jump into what's a rapper. Well, rap is actually an acronym for rhythm and poetry, similar to rhythm and blues, R&B, right? So a rapper is someone who says poetry to a groove, to a beat, to a rhythm. And how they say that poem is determined by the cadence of the groove or the beat per minute or the instrumentation. But they are kind of, I guess you could say, stuck to the beat. If that beat's fast, they may have to cut their lyrics in half, or they may have to double time the way that they say their lyrics in order to get them to be in time with the beat. Okay? A songwriter is just a poet that applies melody to their poems. That's the only difference. To give you an example of a poet, if you go to open mic, you know, and I'm not making fun of them or anything, these are the people that they'll come up with their book, you know, and they'll be like, okay, I'm going to give you this poem, and they might say something like, you know, how many years ago did Marvin ask what's going on? Are we closer to an answer? Some would argue no. Mother still crying, brothers still dying, fathers incarcerated from laws of black hatred. Okay, I kind of read that. You kind of hear my thoughts and my feelings about the world, you know. But if I was going to take it a step further and I was going to perform it and make it theatrical, and really be intentional about what I wanted you to feel, you might see something like this. Paper's gone, and I'm going to command the stage. How many years ago did Marvin ask what's going on? Are we closer to an answer? Some would argue no. Mothers still crying, brothers still dying, fathers incarcerated from laws of black hatred. Okay? Off book, more performative. Now, if I was going to apply rap to that, because rap is rhythm and poetry, right? Maybe I have a beat, and I'm going something like this. How many years ago did Marvin ask what's going on? Are we closer to an answer? Some would argue no. Mother's still crying, brothers still dying, fathers incarcerated from laws of black hatred. Hear how the beat dictated the cadence of what I said and how I said it. If I slow the beat down, maybe give it something like this. How many years ago did Marvin ask what's going on? Are we closer to an answer? Some would have to argue no. Mother's still crying, brothers still dying, fathers incarcerated from laws of black hatred. I changed the beat, which changed my delivery of the poetry. That's rap. What is metering? Metering simply speaks to the tempo or the rhythm for which you say your poetry, or the tempo or the rhythm for which you say your rap, as I demonstrated with that last poem. Now, I will say one cool thing and one cool difference about rap versus spoken word. Spoken word does have rhythm and tempo. Some people lock into a certain rhythm, but I want to say one of the key differences between spoken word and rap is spoken word artists have the ability to speed things up or slow things down whenever they want to at any point in the performance or the delivery of their piece to make things more dramatic, whereas the rapper is really confined to the parameters of the beat, and if they go too fast or too slow under or over the beat, then it makes it seem like they're off time and that they are actually bad rappers or ineffective rappers, which you don't want to do. You just don't want to do it. What we're going to do right now is look at some literary tools to make your poem more memorable or more dynamic. Okay, so we have these tools. One of them is called mimesis. Okay, mimesis is defined as copying, imitating, or mimicking. I will say it's easier to apply that in poetry than it is in rap. Okay, rap has certain rules. It has subgenres, but the community, the hip hop community, has decided that copying other people's style is called biting, and you don't want to be known as a rapper that bites other rappers. So there is constantly this pressure and this motivation to be as original as possible and to make your deliveries as original as possible. You don't want to be looked at as copying someone else's style or mimicking anyone else's style, unless you're doing it to like make fun of them or make a very specific point. But if someone wrote a great line and then you copied that line, you are a biter. Okay. In poetry, it works a little different. You can pay homage to someone by copying their line and restating it. You can echo a thought. It's looked at very differently in poetry or spoken word versus hip hop. Next, we have onomatopoeias. People include onomatopoeias to emphasize actions. These words actually they make the sound of actions of so bang, pop, pow, clink, clank, kazow. If you ever watch if you ever read comic books, I was going to say if you watch comic books, but if you ever read comic books, you see these words a lot. Bang, zoom, zoom, all that stuff. Those are onomatopoeias. So then we have enjambment and dissonance. So these are techniques that are used to break up patterns. As human beings, our brain just works to where we see or hear patterns. If there's a pattern, if something is repeating, our brain is wired to just lock in on that pattern. So as an artist, to keep your poetry or your songs or your lyrics more interesting, you have to consistently switch up the pattern enough so that the audience member doesn't get bored listening to your art. Because if they start to figure it out, then you become predictable, and predictability is boring. To give you an example of this, say I was rapping and the beat was, a popular thing. Okay, I'm gonna just call it out. So a popular thing right now in 2020 is to do triplets and raps, right? This was probably coined by Amigos, right? So you have you know, you have some rappers that are, you know, they're saying cool stuff, but it's all on a triplet, right? And you know, you watch the video and they're in it. Alright, that gets old after a while. You know what I mean? So if you switch it up, you know, maybe you have 4 triplets, and then still while you're in the 3, 4, or 6, 8 time, just throw another rhythm on there. Okay? So it could be alright, so hopefully you found me breaking up the rhythm and playing with different cadences a little bit more interesting than me just going over and over again, right? I don't know, some people like it. I like a little bit of diversity in my music. Just gonna put that out there. Okay, so that's enjambment and dissonance. Dissonance speaks a little bit more to harmonics. So if you're singing or someone's playing music, maybe it's in a major key, and at some point they hit a minor note just to kind of check to see if the audience is listening. It's not that it sounds bad, but they completely break away from the original pattern that was started. Dissonance is just another word for distance. It's like you're putting some distance between what you originally started to keep the audience engaged and guessing and on their feet. Okay, so then we have consonants. So consonants is when an artist emphasize the consonant sounds in their work. So for instance, I'm gonna give you this example written by Big Pun from a song called Twins that was featured in the movie Deep Cover in the late 80s, I want to say. Either late 80s or late 90s, I'm not entirely sure. Lawrence Fishburne is in the movie. It's called Deep Cover, and Big Pun, who is the brother of Fat Joe, who made the song, I think, Lean Back. Alright, anyway, he wrote this very famous hip-hop line, this classic hip-hop line, that he actually says really fast. I can't say it as fast, so I'm just gonna read it. He said, "Dead in the middle of Little Italy, little did we know that we riddled 2 middlemen who didn't do diddly." Okay, so that's an example of consonants. Okay, he is basically like that it'll that DLTLE sound. He's like, he has a lot of that. I'll read it again. I'll read it 2 more times so that you hear. So again, this is a classic hip hop line from Big Pun from a song called Twins that was featured on the soundtrack of a movie called Deep Cover. And he says, "Dead in the middle of Little Italy, little did we know that we riddled 2 middlemen who didn't do diddly." Dead in the middle of Little Italy, little did we know that we riddled 2 middlemen who didn't do diddly. Woo! He says it much faster than I'm saying it, but it is a mouthful. Okay? Alright, so that is an example of consonants, where he's hitting certain consonants a certain way to make it interesting to get your attention. The next thing is assonance. Okay? So assonance is the opposite of consonants. So consonants focus on the consonant sounds, whereas assonance focus on the vowel sounds. So you'll hear rappers like Kendrick Lamar or Busta Rhymes, where they'll just maybe for 4 or 8 lines or a whole 16 bars just focus on one vowel sound. So I'm going to share something that I wrote in a song that I put out a couple of years ago. So the line goes, tell the police to stock up on the chalk and yellow tape, man. Let me loose, I go 8, man. I just killed about 8, man. Claiming that they MCs, but now they in the grave, man. Them dudes is old, I'm the future, they were caveman. So do you hear how I hit the long A in words like ape and cave and tape? Okay? I'll say it again one more time slow for you, and then I'll say it at its normal speed. So I go, tell the police to stock up on the chalk and yellow tape, man. Let me loose, I go 8, man. I just killed about 8, man. Claiming that they MCs, but now they in the grave, man. Them dudes is old, I'm the future, they were caveman. Okay? And if I say it at regular tempo, if I speed it up, if it was to a beat, you know, it would be tell the police stock up on the chalk and yellow tape, man. Let me loose or go 8, man. I just killed about 8, man. Claiming that they MCs, but now they get in the grave, man. Them dudes is old on the future. They were caveman. Okay? And you hear how I even put a little dissonance in there. Kind of threw some triplets in there to break up the rhythm. Okay? What else do we have? Another way to make your literary work sound interesting and exciting and dynamic is by alliteration. Okay, alliteration is when you have a sequence of words. Is when you have a sequence of words that start with the same letter. Okay, almost like a tongue twister, but it may not necessarily rhyme unless it's a rhyming poem. But it's just a sequence of words in a sentence or a poem where every word starts with the same letter. So to give you an example, it's something like, Sally sold seashells by the seashore instead of selling seashells at her sister's store. Got that? Everything started with an S in it. I'll say it again. Sally sold seashells by the seashore instead of selling seashells at her sister's store. Okay? Got that? You know? It just makes it more interesting, more dynamic. It's wordplay. Okay? And that's pretty much it. Those are some of the tricks that you can use to make your poetry or your rap or your song stand out. Okay? I had a student that wrote something really interesting that I liked the way it flowed. It had a little bit of dissonance, and you start to hear some alliteration, some of the same sounds, some consonants, some assonants. So she said, she wrote this song. She said, 6 a.m. in the trap house. Sun ain't up but the peas out. I gotta get this money. The bills I gotta pay ain't funny. I'm seeing too much is affecting me mentally. I got some enemies that want the end of me. Only the real ones in my vicinity. Okay? So you kind of hear how she applied a lot of different techniques. She developed a pattern, but then she breaks it with some dissonance and some enjambment, you know. Just when you think that the rhythm's gonna stop, it kind of starts to go a little bit continuous. There's some inverted rhymes, meaning rhymes within rhymes, or embedded rhymes, as we sometimes call them. So I thought that passage did a good job of adding a little alliteration, assonance, consonants, dissonance. You know, only thing that she didn't have in there was onomatopoeias or mimesis. You know, last thing that we're going to touch on before I give you your assignments are, what is musical theater and what is Broadway? Okay, now I've had some students say, is musical theater and Broadway the same thing, or are they two different things? You know, and so here's the answer. I'm gonna start with a straight play. What is a straight play? Then work. What is music? And and what is Broadway? I'll even throw in what is opera. Okay, so a straight play. A straight play is a piece of work that has some monologues, dialogue, acting, maybe some dancing, but mostly acting. It may have some music, but the music may just be used to underscore, maybe to suggest a certain emotion or feel. But sometimes straight plays have no music at all, because the playwright doesn't want anybody to think that it's a musical. But yeah, it's acting and it's monologues and dialogues. That's a straight play. So then you have a musical. A musical is acting, singing, dancing. Okay? The only difference between a musical and an opera is with an opera, the music never ends. The music never stops for dialogue. Where in a musical, the play is 50%, if not 70% music, but there are points where the music stops for some dialogue. And that is because the music in a musical has very specific reasons. It's highlighting or echoing an emotion. Songs are used to speed up time, or to be anthems or themes for certain characters when they come in or leave, or to help heighten or emphasize the emotional roller coaster that the playwright is trying to take the audience on. That's what musicals pretty much do. And so, what is Broadway? Broadway is pretty much a street in Manhattan, which is in New York, that houses these famous 41 theaters where the best of the best musicals go to be performed. In these theaters, typically seat 500 or more. And that's the criteria for Broadway. So, if you write a musical and it's doing really well, it's getting a buzz and a lot of people are coming to see it, you may be invited to bring your musical to Broadway, which again is in Manhattan, which is in New York. There's a street called Broadway, and on that street there are about 41 theaters. Each one of them seats 500 or more people. If you have a theater and it seats 100 to 49 people, that is considered off Broadway. And if you have a theater that does musicals and it seats 99 people or less, that's considered off Broadway. Real terms, I'm not making this up. 500 or more in Manhattan on the street Broadway, you got Broadway. Not on Manhattan, not in Manhattan, not on the Broadway street, 499 or less, or actually 100 to 499, off Broadway. 1 seat to 99 seats, and not on Broadway, not in New York, off Broadway is what that's called. And that's pretty much it. Now it's time for assignments. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to have you do is go to masterclass.com and read that article entitled Poetry 101. You're going to learn about the different types of poems, and you're going to learn about the different tools that you can use to make your poems or your writing stand out. And there's a lot more information about poetry on that page if you want to dive deeper. So again, that's masterclass.com. The article is called Poetry 101. After that, I'm going to have you watch a couple of TEDx talks. So there's a gentleman by the name of Warwick, who was a pioneer in creating what he thought was hip-hop theater. And in that TED talk, he tells you how he started to create hip-hop theater and why it was necessary for him to create hip-hop theater. So you're going to check that out. He's a really interesting dude. I personally love accents, and he has this nice Jamaican British accent that I think is super dope. So check that out. There's another gentleman who is also British by the name of Colin. He works for the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company, I think. Don't quote me on that. But he does hip hop Shakespeare, and he breaks a couple of things down. He specifically talks about how hip hop and storytelling are so important, because the storytelling is the way to identify the custodian of knowledge. and how that knowledge gets passed from generation to generation, and how certain raps and songs and poems contain a piece of our history that would otherwise be lost if not for these poems, which I think is super dope. So you're going to check him out. I'm also going to have you watch a couple of more episodes of Crash Course Theater for Shakespeare and for Broadway. They're only 15 minutes each, where everything that I gave you is about, with the exception of the article, is about 15 minutes. So you should be good. And then we're going to look at your monologues, and we're going to have you write some poetry. Make sure you check the assignment dashboard, and I'll have your writing assignment there. Thank you again for joining the 2020 Hip Hop Summer Series. This is Page to Stage. I'm Ozivell Eckford. This is sponsored by After School Matters and Uplift High School, and produced by Kumba Links. Thank you for your time. See you next week for video 3, episode 3. Yeah. Peace.